Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for the Building Excellence into Our Clinical Learning Environments for GME. This webinar is brought to you by the American Hospital Association's Physician Leadership Forum and the Accreditation Council of Graduate Medical Education. To present today's session, we are pleased to have with us Dr. Kevin Weiss, Senior Vice President for Institutional Accreditation with ACGME. He will share the purpose of the Clinical Learning Environment Review Program and the core themes from the first cycle of nearly 300 site visits. He'll highlight the progress on engaging residents and fellows in patient safety and quality, as well as the opportunities for improvement. With that, then let me turn it over to Kevin to get us started. Kevin?
Great, and thanks, and hello to everyone who's joined us for this webinar. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I trust and hope that over the next bit of time that we'll be able to give you some information that will be both new to you as well as useful as you think about the work that you're doing as quickly as you get off the call to maybe get going with something you hadn't thought to do. So it's important also to kind of keep in mind that as I speak to you, I'm doing so through the voice of a lot of amazing individuals who've helped bring up the CLEAR program, which we'll be talking about, and the findings that we will be discussing, including the team here at ACGME, lots of volunteers, including the CLEAR Evaluation Committee and our board of directors who had the wisdom to open up a new dialogue, a new conversation, as we like to talk about in this thing called the Clinical Learning Environment Review Program. Just kind of getting started, I wanted to suggest that it's almost really important to start any discussion at our end on CLEAR by lopping off the R, because it's about the clinical learning environment, and this is the world you all live in. You may not call it this per se, or you may be calling it this, but the idea is that there is an entity that exists, whether we make it explicit or as by calling it something or implicitly, as a place where new learners are getting into an environment where they have to learn while the activity is going on. In this case, healthcare is going on. And in our case, and for the next little bit of time, I'll focus on residents and fellows. I would encourage you to kind of think more broadly in what I'm saying, by way of findings and such, to ask, does this apply to other parts of your early learners in your environments? And how are they learning, and how well do some of the things that I speak about in GME, graduate medical education, relate to nursing, pharmacy, other types of learners that you might have around? Also, although most of our focus is strictly on the formal learners that are residents and fellows that are in our purview, even their mentors are part of the learning process. So what we would call the faculty, you of course would call your medical staffs, and the medical students that may, for many of you, be part of your environment in some ways as learners as well within the medical environment. In our definition, what we've said here is it's not just the physical environment that's the learning environment, it's also the people, their values, and the sense of dedication to team and community that help define the clinical learning environment. And if we had more time, I'd actually take you through the bit of literature that would help cement this. My guess is you all would probably quickly agree that an individual is not just shaped by their individual learning in your hospitals and medical centers, but they're actually shaped by the culture of what you provide, and take that through their entire career. And there's actually an evidence base that shows that translates not to just as a sense of values, but actually in terms of skills and ability to practice and outcomes, in terms of patient outcomes. So it's a very real phenomenon. Nursing has been talking about clinical learning environments longer than we in medicine have formally done this, at least through GME. If you go into the literature, you'll see clinical learning environment conversations that exist in the nursing literature, and it's really nice. That literature tends to be more focused on microsystems, or at least on clinical units per se. That's not good or bad, it's just where they've tended to focus. What we in the GME conversation we're going to have on clinical learning environments, really looks more broadly because, in part, as you know, the physician staff and the residents and fellows tend to move around from clinical unit to clinical unit. Sometimes you might argue more than you would wish they would, and like to keep them in more geographic proximity. But the clinical learning environment for GME, we have to think of broadly as the medical center and all its connectivity across departments and clinical service areas, and even inpatient to outpatient as well. So think about the clinical learning environment as I talk about the CLER as this physical and human resource space, because that's how we're doing it. The other part I'd like you to do as we think about this now with the CLE with the R, CLEAR, the Clinical Learning Review, which is the program that was established by ACGME, is different for ACGME and it's different for an accreditor. And I show you here two different columns, not to be totally comprehensive, but to at least show some highlighted points of what we as ACGME have in our wheelhouse is the fact that we do accreditation. We make summative assessments. They're high stakes because it leads to accreditation decisions, and in that case, it also relates to funding through CMS, and we set standards and those standards at minimum will set minimum, sort of the floor of what is expected to have a training program, and we have it and we do it by way of an integrated sets of requirements, the institutional requirements, overseen by the Institutional Review Committee, common program requirements, and then a whole bevy of specialty-based RC requirements that you're probably all familiar with if you, as I expect most of you do, have GME. Now, the CLEAR program is also being run by ACGME, but it is not an accreditation activity, and it was set up that way by the board and with the help of a special committee tasked by the board. And what the committee decided, and John Combs was part of that committee, as well as I had the privilege of sitting on that committee as well, through a period of long deliberation over a number of months, is that we should try and drive not for minimum standards, but we're going to try and drive towards excellence. And you can't use requirements or regulations to get to excellence. Getting to excellence requires the creativity, the desires of individuals to do the best they can. And so we didn't see the accreditation side helping us get there, and that's why a very different approach was taken, and that's saying let's do a formative assessment, let's make it a non-accreditation, let's set a place to look at expectations for what we think is the best that we can be, and to drive a national conversation. And then implicit in that is a deep belief that there is an incredible amount of talent and reservoir of creativity in our GME community and the learning environments in which they are placed, that they can do way better in thinking about what excellence is and in showing it if we just show them what we're seeing and give them that feedback. So the formative feedback is going to drive improvement. And for most of you on the call, I would think that would touch us very closely to a drive of a continuous improvement model. So we come out, we visit, we present you with observations. We believe that if we do that in a way that's non-judgmental and has strong face validity and reliability for you, you'll use that data in a good way, and that'll get us there. And it'll get us much better than if we required it. And we put a firewall between accreditation. There is a pass-through in a very couple small ways, but important ways. One is that you have to have a visit to stay accredited, and that's the accreditation link that makes it very difficult to avoid having a CLEAR visit. The second is that as CLEAR learns things and finds that most everybody's doing things in a certain way, and that's deemed as by the community and by the process that ACGME has as important, that can be turned into a requirement for those few, those 5 or 7 or 10% of places that just aren't making it happen. But that's only for very few items where overwhelmingly everybody knows what to do and they're doing it well, and then there's just a few laggards to help get those laggards over the hump. We haven't yet engaged that. We have some ideas of what that might start looking like in the future, but right now that's on the future list. We have 6 focus areas. For any of you who know CLEAR, you would know these. I'm not going to repeat them, but these are the areas we probe questions around. And in that context, we've been working pretty fast. So the program was just approved in 2011. We had our very first clear visit the last day of September. I sometimes say the 32nd of September because I had to start by promise to the board on the 30th of September. We had completed the first 300 set of visits, probably to many, if not all of you on the call, who have GME on 2015, because these are the larger places, although there might be some of you as hospitals are going to be our second round, which we started just last year in June, and we're moving along on those as well. But overall, we'll be doing about 700 visits every 2 to 3 years, depending upon if you're a larger group of programs, you'll get it every 2 years. If you have a fewer number of programs, 2 core programs or less, you'll get them every 3 at least currently. We started to announce just last year, a few months ago, that we're going to start to not just take the information, but we're going to create a learning community. I'll talk about that shortly. We have now released our first set of findings that will be coming out in a week as a public supplement in the JGME, Journal of Graduate Medical Education. So that's a heads up. I'll give it back to you in a few minutes. And then we're going to have this Pursuing Real Excellence RFP, which I'll spend just a couple of minutes on in a little bit. In addition to that, because for those of you who may have seen the report, it's a big report. It's about somewhere around 100 pages-ish, but it's the sort of thing that you can't take home and just read overnight, or at least you don't want to take home and read overnight, unless, well, I read it, but I can't expect everyone else to do that. We definitely don't expect to have senior managers and executive leadership all feel like they need to read this a huge report. So we said we need to think about what else we can do in addition to the large report, which is out. And at this point, all of the 700-ish sponsoring institutions that are accredited by ACGME have received 2 copies. One has gone to your DIO if you are GME, and the other has gone to the CEO of the clinical learning environment which we visited. And we did that by way of your DIO, which means if you as senior leadership have not seen a copy, your DIO will have a copy of that if you want it. The report of findings has a number of chapters. I'm just going to point out a couple that I think are important for this part of the conversation. There's a wonderful forward by our current chair, Mr. John Duvall, CEO at VCU, and a great introduction by our CEO, Dr. Tom Naska, kind of setting the tone for what we hope you'll see in the report. Technical overview of the program, and then you get to the 2 chapters that I would encourage you to take a close look at if and when you see and we'll spend a very top-line look at it in the next few minutes, which is the overarching themes and the challenges and opportunities in the 6 focus areas. Then for the people who love data, we have detailed findings and methods with a lot of appendices with lots of data tables, which people are finding very helpful when they want to get to very specific items. Now, there are 4 overarching themes, and I'm going to actually spend a little time on it directly, but we also have 28 challenges and opportunities across the 6 focus areas. We being the program had many more challenges and opportunities we saw. These got prioritized into 28 by the CLEAR Evaluation Committee, which is a group of volunteers, multi-stakeholder volunteers who oversee the program. So you're only seeing essentially the highest priority of the challenges and opportunities in those 6 focus areas. I'll give you an example or 2 as we go forward in a few minutes. However, there were a number of other challenges and opportunities that were thought important, and those will actually be folded in what we're calling the issue briefs, which I'll get to in a moment. So, 4 overarching themes. We didn't directly go to look at interactions across the 6 focus areas. We as a program and as charged by our board said we need to look in 6 focus areas. We need to look at patient safety. We need to look at healthcare quality and how residents engage in that. We need to look at professionalism around the resident environment that they're experiencing. However, in doing that 300 times over, or actually technically 297 times over, what we started to see were some things that emerged that seemed to be not classifiable in those 6 focus areas as individual, but rather important overarching themes, Uber themes, sort of, as you might be able to call them. And we found 4 of them that we prioritized. Again, there were more than 4, but we said we didn't want to put into the community too much, too fast, too hard. And we thought that getting 4 out there we can talk about in short order, and we'll see, because today's webinar is one example of that, and I hope it's successful in getting these 4 themes across. The first theme is that the clinical learning environments vary in their approaches to and capacity for addressing patient safety and healthcare quality, and the degree to which they engage the residents and fellows and physicians in addressing these areas. These are two very important statements that are joined by a comma, and I want to point that out to you and hopefully you'll be doing some follow-up where we can actually take a moment to think about this by reading it again. The first is we saw a lot of variability when we went from institution to institution, from your hospital to the next hospital to the next medical center, in what they were doing in quality and safety. More importantly, we sometimes saw that the variability existed within the institution. So what was going on and how they approached quality and safety, I'm talking about methods and basic approaches to how one even looks at quality and safety, varied from department, service area to service area. Sometimes intent, that your hospital medical center wanted it to be that way. Sometimes it was not intended, and when we came forward and reported that back to you and your leadership, you were either aware of it and trying to fix it or not, or you were unaware of it, and that was kind of the what we sometimes call the aha moments, where you actually learn things that you didn't know. Examples would be that we not infrequently found that there were patient safety recording systems that were pocketed in different departments that in some cases weren't even known about by the central administration. So that first part of the sentence says that there's a lot of variability out there. We're not saying that there shouldn't be. We're just saying that it surprised us at the degree of which variability, and therefore, how do you actually engage the residents and fellows in that? And it turns out that there's a huge variability in how you're doing that as well. So you're getting two things going at the same time, which means that, as you can expect, there's not a lot of clear signal as to what the residents and fellows really need to know and feel like they really need to incorporate into their life. So this is probably one of the most important pieces to link several of the focus areas together, obviously patient safety and healthcare quality, but you can easily see how this will bleed into issues of care transitions, how you manage professionalism, how you manage issues of supervision and even fatigue management and mitigation. If, in fact, you have a confusing message going on to your residents fellows who you're training as new learners. Overarching theme 2, the clinical learning environment varies in the approaches to GME, implementing GME. In many clinical learning environments, it's largely developed and GME is basically in its own silo. Sorry, that's my shorthand for thinking about this one. This probably does not come to a surprise to many of you. To some of you, you may actually say that's not our place at all, and that's probably true because there's variability here. But as a 297 cohort that we visited, it was a dramatic sort of eye-opening event at sometimes how things going in GME just were not known at all, including important things such as issues in patient safety events related to GME, issues in supervision, senses of fatigue and burnout that were just not known, that were known in the GME but not known in the rest of the learning center, learning environment. So this is probably not very efficient. It's definitely probably interfering with patient care and definitely with processes related to high-value care that we heard quite a lot of language around, or high-reliability care, those sorts of things that I think many, if not most of you, are in one way or another are working towards in your own language. And that to have made a commitment to bringing on these new learners, these graduate medical education new learners, the way that the silo affects is it gets into the culture of let's protect ourselves from making sure that having these residents around don't interfere with what we're trying to do, but let's try and do the best we can at the same time with them, which is, I'll come back at the very end, which is part of the conversation that we need to rethink fundamentally. Where's the value in GME, particularly if it is a siloed activity, and how we go through that. It's almost that we have to keep in mind that graduate medical education doesn't happen in a vacuum, and also clinical care where there's residents and fellows doesn't happen in a vacuum outside of the GME. But that's kind of what's going on to some degree in small amounts, or in some cases very large amounts at some of the places we visited. Overarching theme 3 is the clinical learning environments vary in the extent which they invest in continual educating and training their faculty members. Now, I have to say, if I was to rewrite this, I'd probably say their medical staff who serve as faculty members, because in the language of your hospitals and medical centers, most of you don't think in terms of faculty. You think in terms of your medical staff who train your residents. And in fact, there's an important piece there, and that is to go from a medical staff who trains residents to a medical staff who's a faculty who's qualified to train residents is a big step, one step that we don't really support. We just assume that if you're a physician and you want to devote time to training doctors, you'll get it. And if the residents like you and you do the lectures, everything's fine, as long as the residents manage to finish their training and do good on their exams. But that's not what we're after. We're after patient care. We're after training doctors to do good patient care. And in order to do that, we have the what I sometimes call the goose to gosling, where you have this imprinting where, as we probably all would to some degree agree, that the residents aren't just picking up the language that the medical staff you have provide, but every action they're watching closely to learn how to be a doctor. And do those faculty really, those medical staff really have the faculty skills to help that maximally work for the benefit of the training and thereby for the benefit of patient care. And that's probably I keep on coming to that patient care piece, which is probably the most important element here. My computer's telling me I have to enroll my fingers into fingerprinting, but I'm not going to do that. So the fourth and final theme is the clinical learning environments vary in the degree to which they coordinate and implement resources across the healthcare professions. Another finding that didn't fit neatly into one of the 6 areas, however, at the same time, we felt this was huge. Something that you probably already know individually, or at least in some way, the inefficiencies that we see by not doing integrated resource work in terms of the educational activity immediately bleed out into the fact that it inhibits interprofessional training. The example that I use, and I hope that I'm not going to say something that anyone thinks I can associate with a particular place we visited, but I do want a particular experience we had is where we talked to some leadership, and they said we do interprofessional team training on team steps, and we have the residents do this interprofessionally, because the way we do it is we have some of the residents be residents and some of them role play the nurses. And that was their interprofessional experience in team steps. And then the nurses were doing their own team steps as well. And they're very serious-minded in telling us that, and we had to accept that as really their best approach. It didn't seem to us that there was an opportunity missed. Now, that may be one example of many that I could share with you in terms of potential for opportunities for interprofessional. If one begins to think about how your resources are, over time, historically, kind of just become isolated, where nursing does their thing, medicine does their thing, other health professions do their things. Maybe they share by parallel play a common space in a simulation or a set of conference rooms, but it's often parallel play in that activity as opposed to having a process to bring at least the conversation together is what can we do more interprofessionally, and thereby save money because you're doing it more effectively and more efficiently, and improve team-based care of the patients. Back again to the patient care piece. Well, that's it for the 4 overarching themes. I want to just give you a couple examples because really the heart of the report is and the 28 challenges and opportunities, and underlying that piece of the report is data, and both are in the report. I'm not going to go through the 28 challenges and opportunities. I'm going to leave that as kind of this talk is hopefully a trailer, kind of a movie trailer for you to maybe pick up the book and thumb through it. However, I want to share at least a couple pieces of data because it's important for you to know that we started there in building some of these observations. So this is an example of what we did with the audience response system. We interviewed over 8,000 residents, about 6,000 faculty, and about as many program directors, and of course 300 CEOs and their executive teams, and so on and so forth. This particular one comes from the residents, where we interviewed 8,000. You're only seeing about 6,000 here because the first question was, have you actually seen an adverse event, what looked like it'd be a patient safety event, and about 2,000 just said no. Now this is PGY 2s, 3s, and 4s, so they've been in your in your clinical learning environments across the country for 2, 3, 4 years, and they had said they had never seen a patient safety event, which to ourselves was kind of curious. But of those who did see it, this is the distribution of what they said that they did in terms of reporting it into the safety system that the hospital or the clinical learning environment wants them to use. And what you see here is the median, which is 47%, so just under half, and didn't vary by years of training. So it's a kind of flip of a coin whether a resident actually had that experience of submitting it in. And then what you see also is the huge variability. Now, let me postscript this by saying we also went and talked, as you may know, to the patient safety leadership and said, how many residents reported into your patient safety system as a way to check this number? It turns out that what you're seeing on the graph is a highly inflated number as compared to the actual observations in patient safety systems as we went around the country, probably by a full order of magnitude. We only saw quite often at best 8 to 10% of resident events, not residents, but resident events. So now, with that in mind, I'm going to show you one more little picture here. We're going to have report of findings. We're going to be doing issue briefs, so there'll be more data to follow. The first one's going to be on an executive summary. The second one's on patient safety. Third one is on healthcare quality. We are going to be doing one on healthcare disparities. Essentially, all of the 6 focus areas with healthcare disparities as a special call-out because our board asked us to do that. And we're not just going to take that information and feed it back, because we are going to do that. We went to our board of directors and said, we're hearing from the community they want to have best practices. And we said to them as program and then by the Clear Evaluation Committee, we don't want to define best practices. We don't want to be the king makers of what is right and what's wrong. It should come from the community. And the community needs to build legs and capacity to be able to have that experience and be able to declare it for themselves, because there's so much diversity in all of your organizations that there is no best practice. There's going to be lots of really great practices, and the reason they're going to be great is because of the environment that they were created in, and you're going to have to figure out as you look at these great practices whether your environment matches that other environment enough that you'd be willing to adapt it. And that's a very complex thing that can't be achieved by ACGME declaring the best practice. So we propose to them creating a learning environment and a community of learning environments. John Duvall, who I mentioned before, again, is chairman of ACGME at the current time, the chairman of the board, just kind of put out the idea that if we could imagine what if everyone really did know, did engage the residents and brought them in, wouldn't that be just spectacular to helping advance the care and the quality of patient care? We also think about the fact that we have these 2 entities, GME and the clinical learning environments, and as I mentioned in overarching theme number 2, they're somewhat, GME is somewhat siloed currently, focused on the learner, where of course you in the patient care environment are focused on the patient and the care provided. And what we really need to do is rethink that relationship, and this one just reminds us that we have to think about that relationship that is not separate but actually integrated and interdigitated as best as possible. So the Pursuing Excellence Initiative takes a look at exploring the variability that we saw in the national report. It's going to be seeking new models to how to make things better and facilitate the dissemination of those rapidly to you all as a community of clinical learning environments to try and see which of those you want to take on. We're doing this through 3 components, what we call the pathway innovators, the leaders, and the learners. You can see the innovators are the smallest. The next one's going to be the pathway leaders, and the largest group will be the pathway learners. I'll mention what those are, but it's all part of a shared learning community that ACGME is going to do over the next 4 years. The innovators is going to be looking at the 4 overarching themes, and they're going to dig deep into the soil of what a clinical learning environment should do, not just for GME, which will be our focus of this, but my guess is it's going to rightfully bleed over to what does it mean to have early learners in an ongoing clinical operation, and how should we be able to best manage that for patient care and for the other reasons we want to have learners in our organization. The next is the leaders, which is going to be looking at each of the 6 focus areas. So they're not going to look at the overarching themes in the leaders group. They're going to tackle more tactical work in patient safety or supervision or professionalism, and we'll be doing those as 1-year collaboratives. And finally, we'll have the learners, which are individuals who really come from organizations who aren't ready for big change, but they do want to soak up as quickly as they can what are the things that are working across the country. And so we'll be creating medical and healthcare education opportunities to assist us. Now, you shouldn't be able to read this. What this slide is our partners. We call them the Pursuing Excellence Partners. These are organizations who have agreed to work with us in some fashion to help accelerate this learning activity. And we're so pleased with the number of organizations who have joined in. Many, if not most of all of these organizations are going to be helping us select the ones that are part of the innovators. And AHA is going to be part of that, and we're really pleased and proud that they've been working closely with us. Now, so just on the Pathway Innovators, we're going to choose about 8 to 10 teams. We're going to actually give them a formal, we being ACGME are going to give them a formal support of about up to $75,000 a year for 4 years to help with incremental costs related to doing some of this work. And we're currently accepting proposals all the way through May 4th. So if you're interested, it'll be a real run to the finish, but it's still open for that. Ultimately, through Pursuing Excellence, we're creating a shared learning experience to create a national community focused on the CLE. We are just putting that CLE right up in the sweet spot of our crosshairs, and we're saying that's the most important goal for patient care and GME, and that's the intersection we're going to work at. We can't do it alone because it's not just about the docs. It is about a much more complex learning environment, including care environment with other professionals, which have to be brought into this. So let me shift gears entirely now, because I've given you a quick as quick as I could on the many things that are happening in the CLEAR program, and just ask you what kind of take-home messages should we as a hospital health system consider from what we're seeing in the CLEAR findings today. Now I'm going to shift from everything I've said before has been well vetted through CLEAR program, through CLEAR evaluation committee, and I'm just going to talk about my ideas, which you can weigh any which way you want to, but just know that they're not official ACGME policy procedures or anything else like that. So here's some of my thinking. The first is some suggestions, and these are, as I was sort of trying to think about what would I suggest if I was in your shoes and I was trying to do some really innovative and exciting work, and I may or may not be part of the innovators. But I got this report from my CLEAR visit, and now I've got the big CLEAR report
finding.
The first thing I do is have someone read the report and summarize for your institution what it means. Now, I said someone because the natural instinct is to have the DIO at your institution do that. What we see is that works out just fine. But what I was thinking about when I thought about the suggestion is what happens if we took an independent person who really didn't have any skin in the game to do that same summarization and see what they saw. I don't know if that's the right or wrong thing to do, but it just was a curious moment as I was thinking through this. The second is to try and avoid the self-congratulatory approach. We've heard this from more than one place, is look at how good we did. Let me tell you a little secret. I hope you won't tell anybody. And that is, we work really hard to find ways to say the most difficult things in the nicest ways possible in those reports. Not because we're trying to be solicitous, but because we want to make sure that you all feel comfortable in hearing what we have to say. We take off all the sharp edges in those reports. We avoid anything that would feel like and we say this to you directly on our visits, we don't want any gotchas, because those gotchas become stalls in the conversation. You focus on the gotcha and you don't focus on the bigger picture. So you can easily walk through that report and say, wow, and we've really done wonderful. And in fact, probably, if my guess is out of the 297, about 297 of you could say that you had done really, really well. And you have done well in many ways, because 10 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about the complexity of safety and quality the way we're having in this webinar. We just have miles to go before we sleep on this one. And there's some really important, fundamental good things we can do. So try to avoid the self-congratulatory would be my suggestion. It's not good to treat this as a checkoff list, because if you do that, you're going to have about 125, 200, 300 checkoffs, and that's terrible. It feels overwhelming, and it's probably also going to lead to some very short-shrifted sort of solutions, simple solutions for complex problems kind of thing, which is right next to try avoid boiling the ocean. Even if you identify 5 or 7 things, trim them down, because it's almost impossible to do some of these things easily because they are complex. And then the solutions, if you look at the solutions you've come up with and they look like they're a GME solution, let's educate. Let's put another system in to provide another module online. You probably have missed an opportunity to really get the solution done well. Now, those suggestions are kind of more on the avoiding the negative side. I'm going to give some suggestions which I think are kind of viewed kind of on the really exciting and positive side. Pick out just one of the overarching themes and begin working on it. There was, in reading the report that you got as an individual site, you would not have had the overarching themes commented on because we didn't have those. We had the 6 focus areas. So the overarching themes would be new and wouldn't be in your site visit. Take a look and have a robust discussion on those overarching themes and pick one. Pick a few challenges and work on them. I have 2 to 5. I do that because I can remember things that I can count on one of my hands. So if I'm talking to a person as I'm walking down the hall, I can actually use one hand to say, using my thumb saying, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and this, and I kind of run out after about 5 for me. Think strategically over tactically. We're seeing a lot of, and hearing a lot of people making changes, but they're tactical changes. And in other words, they're things that say, let's make everyone do this to get that result, as opposed to saying, what is it that we want to achieve? The simplest version of that in my mind is, and I haven't had an answer yet, which is, what do we want every resident who comes to our clinical learning environment to have experienced in patient safety before they leave, and we send them either out to the world outside of our community, or perhaps even more importantly, we keep them and they become our community. And then what do we do to make sure we assure that happens? That to me is more strategic rather than the tactical of let's make sure everyone resident reports one more event this year. Make sure you engage interprofessional teams. So if everyone around the table looks like a physician, you may not be getting the best robust answers to what you need to do. Include the program directors in the discussions. They are pretty much feeding a little deer in the headlights about what CLEAR is. And if that's the case, it means that it's not only our inability at ACGME to communicate the value of it, but it means that your end at the clinical learning environments, they're not being pulled in to say, what are we doing here about these things? And so maybe that might help you because they're important levers. And then commit to enhancing the conversations with accountable action. So give yourself dates and times and actual things you're going to do. So just the last couple of thoughts here. What begins to describe the value of investing time to improve my hospital health system as a clinical learner? Why should I bother trying to make a better clinical learning environment? And I sort of asked myself the question again. This is not ACGME thinking. It's just kind of me with my experience base, for better or for worse. And so if you don't like it, just know that it was just one person's thinking. And what I did for this is I said, let's think about this across two, not ends, but 2 points on a spectrum, because I don't know that these are ends on a spectrum. And the 2 ends, not the 2 ends, on one side, towards one side is the reason we're doing GME at my hospital or my medical center is to address the educational mission. That's the value. Or it's to contribute to our public image. We want to say that we're a teaching place because that's good for our advertisement. Or we have additional service capacity. Yeah, it's inefficient. I might be able to do as good with a mid-level provider, but there's a little bit of offset because we get some support from CMS to pay part of the salary or something like that. So think of that as one end of the spectrum. And by the way, we've heard all that in one way or another at institutions, and I just put them collectively into one set of thoughts. And I'm not painting any particular institution here, just from one side. And think about value very differently. So this is a kind of an alternative end of the spectrum of value. We know, we're able to say that we know that having GME enhances our patient care, specifically attributable to these aspects of the triple aim. And if you can articulate those and know how that's happening, then you have a pathway from GME to improving patient care. We know that GME ensures our future capacity for well-trained medical staff. Nationally, about 30% of physicians graduating out of programs stay in the community and or at the institution that they trained. Your training, even if you have, except for the rare institutions who might be with us who truly train for export, most all of you are training a good portion of your future very existence by training the docs that are going to be there to help guide your system. And that, at least in my mind, says you want to make sure that they're got what you need in terms of systems thinking in mind, that they know how to solve problems in team-based approaches, that they really have in good ways of managing and observing things that are deficits and helping you get to high value on them, which leads to a way to look at value saying that our business case improves because we have the GME activity. So I wanted just in the last couple of slides just to put in your mind the fact that we're not unaware that GME is not the center focus of life right now in any of your institutions, although we do respect that it's an important part. You're taking time to listen on this. And more importantly, that you're trying to understand how to make it better, which is fantastic. But we do know that we're living in a world of increased physician accountability. With the SGR fix, we're going to see physicians measured more and more. You as hospital leadership, medical center leadership, know the world of value-based and pay-for-performance type of care. We also live in this world of health information technology, and the positive end for all of us. We know the electronic health record, the negative impact that it's taking on us, and that's a problem that feels in some way can overwhelm us. Although I have to say, GME has been always one of the few things we hear very consistently is, thank God we have these residents. They help us. They get this information. They're actually some of our super users and helped us guide us into IT. I think we've undercapitalized on that, even though we've seen across a number of your institutions that you have capitalized on it, but I don't think we've really thought through what it means to have this incredible generation of really bright IT native individuals who are going to be our future of our healthcare system. And then, of course, there's that Affordable Healthcare Act, which is helping redefine just about everything we think about in terms of health systems and payment, which is rapidly evolving. The last few things I showed you about the external environment, to me, though, are all assets to why we want to get to those four overarching themes faster and faster and should not be distractions to this. I can bring to mind a couple other documents, a couple from the GME side of life, and that's the IOM report on GME and NACE report, which helps support what we're saying and what our findings of CLEAR. So we're not alone in this. We're just probably coming out with cleaner, sharper data. Or actually, not cleaner data, just we're coming out with data as opposed to a lot of very thoughtful expert knowledge in this. And the other part that we're also aware of is the work that's being done nationally and with a little bit of extra push from the IOM on the learning health system. And that the clinical learning environment is just a piece of what those of you who are on the learning health system journey are trying to do. So there's a real nice opportunity to help understand that this is not just about the early learners, which is what GME is about in your health systems, but really it's part of, you can't have a successful learning health system without having a learning environment for your early learners. I won't go through the particular definition, but I do, for those of you who haven't seen this work, it's a really nice way to create a conversation with your GME community. I leave the formal presentation now with a quote. If I have to believe that I can do it, I shall surely acquire the capacity to do it, even if I may not have it at the beginning. And I think what we have is an incredible amount of talent that's on the journey towards what we would look at as excellence on our pathways. We have a long journey to go. For those of you who are guessing who the quote is, it's Gandhi. So that's it for my formal presentation. I look forward now to time for Q&A and in any which way you'd like to have it.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. And I'm going to ask the operator now to open up the lines and give the instructions about how questions can be asked.
Thank you. The floor is now open for questions. If you do have a question, please submit it through the chat box on the lower right-hand side of your screen. If you prefer to ask your question through the phone, please press *1 on your telephone keypad at this time. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you do have a question, please submit it through the chat box or press *1 on your telephone keypad at this time. Please hold while we poll for questions.
While we are waiting for calls to come in on the open line, I just want to tell you, Kevin, you got a couple of kudos on that last quote. Several people said that was great and really set the a great summary of what you spoke about. A couple of questions, though, did come in. One is, does this mean that they're going to have a clear visit every 2 to 3 years?
Yes, so either every 2 years or every 3 years. The person who's asking that question is probably going to be on the 3-year cycle, at least currently. What we've done is there are about 700 sponsoring institutions that we recognize that each sponsoring institution it has a different configuration in terms of the number of clinical learning environments or participating sites they work with. So let's say one's looking at, well, by way of example, a place that I know, Northwestern, which I'm actually looking at a window at, they have Northwestern Memorial Hospital, they've got their Women's Hospital, they've got other hospitals in their system. What we look to is find the particular medical center or hospital that has the most residents in it, and that becomes the place we visit. In doing so, we learn how many programs and residents they have. If they've got more than 2 core programs, and core programs are things like internal medicine or general surgery or urology, any of the core programs that ACGME has, they fall into what we call the larger sponsoring institutions for the purposes of CLEAR, and they get visits every 2 years. If they have 2 core programs or less, they fall into what we call our smaller sponsoring institution program, and we are currently set up to do those visits every 3 years. And that program did not get, the smaller ones were lucky in the sense that they got a little bit of a delay. We view it as they missed the opportunity a little bit early, but we started that up in June of 15 with our alpha and beta testing, and we're now fully running on that program. We're doing about 5 or so visits a week into the smallers, and there's about 300, maybe 5 to 6 weeks. Yeah, across. Okay, so Robin Wagner's with me, and she's helping me get the numbers right. So yes, expect a visit in the next couple of years if you're smaller and you haven't had one, and you do have residents.
Okay, a couple of questions about the safety reporting that's come in. One was, when you talk about safety reports, are you saying that only 18%, only 10%, I'm sorry, of patient safety reports are coming from residents, or 10% of residents have actually made reports?
It's the former. It's the events, the patient safety events done by residents. Let me actually, because that's the most we really see. I shouldn't say the most. There's probably 1 or 2 institutions that may have eked above the 10%. In our reporting, we actually have the actual number. I want to think it's much lower, like it's in the range of 2 to 3% is the median for the country. I hope I'm not getting that too far off. Of events were reported by residents, and I have to say, if you unpack that into our experience, what you find is much of that happens in certain programs that tend to want to do that. So we see a lot of medicine programs that emergency medicine are some of our common ones that really focus in on reporting more than others. There are other types of programs that we almost never see or rarely see much in the way of reporting coming from when we actually talk about reports with the residents themselves. So that average, a lot of stuff gets covered up in that average. The other part is we don't know if you've got a few residents who really get the excited about patient safety reporting, and they end up reporting 5, 10, or 15 reports over the year because they find that this is really an exciting way to learn. So we don't know. We just know that somewhere under 10%, and probably with a median of 3 to 4% of the reports are, even in big institutions where they have 800 or 1,000 residents, we see very, very much that small percentage, which is quite interesting. We've been to places where they don't track residents. Their system is not activated to differentiate the reporters, and there's good and bad parts of that we've heard. And we've been to places where Sadly enough, no residents ever report into the system. They use other mechanisms to do so. Let me just take one other postscript to that, which is the biggest piece to event reporting from our perspective, as we're getting, and I'm going to go into personal view because we don't have a policy or we don't have a clear statement on this, is if you take a smart, really talented medical school graduate, as they all are, we've got just the most amazing cohort of people coming out of medical school each year, and you put them through an experience of patient safety event reporting and they hear nothing back. How many times are they going to do that again in their busy life? Or if you do that and it's a bad experience, how many times will they do that? And then in this world of social media, how quickly will that experience be picked up by the rest of the residents in their program, and how many will be picked up in the rest of the experiences in their sponsoring institution? And boy, oh boy, it bleeds over pretty quick across the country to friends and across different programs in different areas. So we can't think about it, at least in my mind, I would propose, we can't think about it as event reporting. We have to talk about it as what is the patient safety learning experience that they're getting. And then trying to unpack that and more importantly, try and strategize what is it we're trying to achieve. And I said earlier in the conversation, and I believe it is a nice way to start the conversation, a strategic question is, it's your organization, not from ACGME to tell you, but from your organization to ask yourself, when we send a resident on their way, they've been with us 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever, what can we say about what their talent is in patient safety observation, helping be part of a team to fix what they've observed, and be able to promote that, maybe even a small proportion of them lead that. I don't know how many of you on the call would be able to say for your organization that you've had that discussion yet. I don't feel there would be very many nationally that I have heard have had that discussion.
Okay. Operator, are there any calls in the queue?
Not at this time, sir.
Okay. Kevin, another great initiative of the ACGME is on physician well-being. And one question I ask, how does the CLEAR findings integrate into that initiative around physician well-being?
So I'll start by saying what we've learned so far, and then I'll leave it with a stay tuned because we're rapidly evolving on that. In the first round, most of our conversation focused on how do residents deal with fatigue and expectations around duty hours and fatigue. And what we found is that residents, by and large, when you present a scenario where they're fully, we paint a resident who's fully fatigued, they know they're tired, they've been drinking coffee to the max, they still are tired, they took a quick little nap, they're still tired, and then we say, what would you expect to have happen if you in your program? And a third of them said that they would continue to power through even though they have a few more hours work to do, rather than be expected to be taken off and substituted at that point in time. As we went into the second cycle, which we're now well into for the larger programs, because of what we heard on the first cycle from the faculty, we were suspecting there was some burnout going on. And so we've now started talking about burnout with residents and burnout with faculty and fatigue management with faculty. And I don't want to foreshadow too much the information, but let me just say we're finding a very rich set of conversations. The one piece of that conversation that I feel comfortable sharing with you is we've had a number of faculty, when we start talking about this, express gratitude to the ACGME, and I'll say it in that way, for opening up the dialogue, the conversation about faculty burnout, because they feel that they don't have a place to talk about it. So that's kind of just a foreshadowing, another trailer to the future of what you'll actually see in the next set of CLEAR results, but that'll be a little while. The final piece is that we're taking this straight on, and so expect it's going to be more about well-being in cycle 3 of the CLEAR visits. It's a topic that our board of directors has taken on for good cause, for all the reasons why many of you might be talking more and more about well-being as well. And we'll be making a more formal CLEAR announcement in the near future regarding this.
Our next question has to do with your Pursuing Excellence initiative, and they want to know if the innovative group or institutions, those that are selected to participate in that, will they be selected on their specific proposed project, or will the group decide which proposals to pilot? So I guess it's really about the selection process in the Pursuing Excellence initiative.
Yeah, so as part of the application, we've asked them to all give us their insights to which of the four overarching themes they, at their sponsoring institutions, they want to tackle. We are going to then, as a group, move forward with one overarching theme to start with. We have a good sense of which of those themes might be most prevalent, because we did a request for information about 4 weeks earlier. We're expecting the faculty, the 8 organizations or thereabouts to be our leaders. So we will talk with them, and we will suggest to them the way we would like to approach this, which is by picking a common overarching theme to start with, because we're going to, over the 4 years, to tackle all 4 of them. And then they're going to help us figure this out, because those 8 teams that we're going to be supporting, we want to become the nidus for a very strong social learning community, and so they have to own it. It can't be directed by ACGME to do this or that. It really has to be what they would like to do as a community, and so we're going to be working very hard to build them into a community of leaders for the rest of the GME and CLE community.
Okay, well, we've reached the time of the close of this webinar. I want to thank Kevin for his very insightful comments and great work around the clinical learning environment. And we look forward to working with ACGME and the other partners in engaging work to improve the learning environment. Again, I want to thank you all for participating in today's webinar. As a reminder, you can find a recording of this session and the slides on our website at www.ahaphysicianforum.org. Please watch for our newsletter and go to our website for details for our next webinar, The Impact of Emotional Intelligence and Resiliency on Healthcare Performance, with Dr. Larry McAvoy and Tracy Duberman, and that is scheduled for June 23rd. With that, I want to thank you all for your participation. I want to thank Dr. Weiss and the team from ACGME and all of you participating in the clinical learning environment.